Good evening, church. Greetings to you here from South Africa, Durban. I hope that you are doing well. We love you, think about you every day, and cannot wait to be in your presence. Last week, Sunday night, I did a lesson from Ecclesiastes called Empty Life. If you haven't listened to that lesson, I would encourage you to go listen to it. I think there's some important and really basic stuff mentioned in there. And Ecclesiastes is an interesting book. As I said last week, for in case you did not listen to last week's lesson, Ecclesiastes is a more rational, let's say critical type of proverbial writings. It's what we call the second stage of wisdom development. The example I gave last week is that Proverbs was sort of the first stage where people evaluated general developments or general ways of society, and that sort of Proverbs writings would conclude, if we look at humanity, it seems like bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people. Ecclesiastes is the second level of wisdom tradition that reflects on that and says, hey man, that's not always the case. It's not always true. I mean, sometimes bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. And so it's sort of the next level of wisdom written by the great King Solomon. So Ecclesiastes, in a way, leaves things open-ended, right? It sort of leaves more questions than answers. It talks more about doubt than faith in a way. It sort of depicts life without God. Without God, there's no purpose, there's no meaning to life. And the key theme of Ecclesiastes is this: vanity. And vanity literally means a puff of air. And that's why Solomon says everything under the sun is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Anything under the sun is a reference to the absence of God, because God is above the sun, right? So if you include what's above the sun, then suddenly life has meaning. But if you look at life without God, everything's obscure, nothing makes sense, there's no purpose, there's no meaning to life if God does not exist. And last week we concluded, we said, listen, according to Solomon, nothing will give you a fulfilled life outside of God, because God gives you joy and God gives you something that steps into eternity. If life doesn't have joy and there's nothing eternal about life, then surely life is meaningless. And so pursuing pleasures and wealth and wisdom and knowledge, money, all of these things are absolutely meaningless. They don't really give you a fulfilled life because they don't have eternal significance. And also, without God, you cannot enjoy them. So it's also just the chasing after the wind. Tonight's title for tonight's lesson is Just Luck. Just luck. Let me give you a few illustrations. This is Howard Lutnick. He went to work late on that morning of September 11, 2001. Remember that almost 3,000 people died in that incident. So he went to work late that morning. It was his son's first day at kindergarten. He was the chief executive of Cantor Fitzgerald, the company that occupied floors 101 to 105, just above the impact zone. The firm lost 658 of its 960 employees. That is insane. That is more than half of the people. His brother also died in the air crash. Now, the question I would like to ask about him is, was it just luck for him and bad luck for the rest? It was luck for him that he was one of these few hundred people that survived, and bad luck for the other people. What about this lady, Greer Epstein? She was the executive director of Morgan Stanley. She rarely ever left her offices on the 67th floor because she never had time. A friend asked her 20 to 9 to catch a cigarette with her. While on the elevator, they felt a jolt in the building, but as they reached the bottom, smoke and confetti was everywhere from the hit of the first plane. As she lit her cigarette, the next plane flew right into her offices. The question once again is this: was it luck? Was it just good luck that she wasn't in her offices when this happened? What about this guy, Mark Winegard? On his way to work after being late, he was phoned and told the trade centers has been hit by a plane. 13 months later, He survived a terrorist bombing in Bali, but his fiancée unfortunately died. In 2004, he found himself in Japan when the tsunami hit that killed, I can't remember if it was 23,000 or 230,000 people. He escaped 3 tragedies. He escaped the World Trade Center, then he escaped a terrorist attack in Bali, and then he escaped the tsunami that hit Japan in 2004. Was he just lucky? Edwin Robinson, don't have a photo of him here, but it's a bit of a different story. He was a bold truck driver that lost his sight and most of his hearing in a truck accident. 9 years later, he was crawling on the grass outside his home trying to find a tuk-tuk. Or trying to find tuk-tuk. That's his chicken. Okay? When lightning struck him. Goodness gracious. It blew his earpieces out. And after lying for a few moments on the grass, he got up and he went inside the house. Within hours, he could hear and see again like before. That's crazy. It sounds like a story out of a movie. Was this just luck? Think about it. Were these people just lucky? And those who died, were they just unlucky? Did they themselves bring about what happened to them, or did God save them? Here's the definition of luck. Success or failure apparently brought by chance rather than through one's own or God's actions. How would you feel if I told you today that it was just luck that you got your degree? That you have succeeded to where you are? That you are healthy? It's just luck that you're healthy, that you got such a nice wife or husband, that you are strong and can do things and have got intellect, that you are good at certain things, that you own a house or car. It's just luck that you have all these things. You know, most people would not be very happy with you if you just say that, because you would point to yourself and say, but you've made all of these things happen. You worked hard. That's why you have a house and a car. It's you that keep yourself alive. Listen to what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11 to 12. He says, I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no man knows when his hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so men are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. Wow, what an interesting text. Is it true? Well, in a way, look at some biblical stories. David wasn't the strongest, but he killed Goliath. Nabal wasn't the wisest, yet he had much wealth. Let's get some perspective here. Solomon is talking about the events of life from the perspective of a life without God. From the atheist perspective, David was just lucky that stone hit Goliath between the eyes. From the theist perspective, David wasn't lucky. God made it happen and purposed it to happen the way that it did. If you didn't believe in God, then you would say to David, hey, you got lucky there, my brother. You just got lucky with that slingshot. If you did believe in God, you would have said, God was good to you there, my friend. Now consider the movie Life of Pi. I've spoken to you about this movie probably before, and if you haven't watched it, I would like to challenge you to go watch it. It's actually very interesting. It's a fascinating story. Pi is an Indian boy growing up in India. His family owns a zoo. He's very religious, and you know what, we could call him a Catholic, Hindu, Muslim / Christian. He tried all of the faiths. He was in search of God. In time, his family decided to immigrate to Canada by ship. They were to take all the animals of the zoo with them. But on the way, the ship sank. Pi ended up in a lifeboat with a zebra, hyena, orangutan, and a tiger, and the tiger's name is Richard Parker. The hyena eventually kills the zebra and then the orangutan. Then the tiger kills the hyena, and Pi, together with the tiger, they float along the oceans for many days until they come to shore in Mexico. But on the journey, they saw various miracles. They saw a glow-in-the-dark whale jump out of the water. They were fed by flying fish. They found a floating carnivorous island with millions of meerkats. There were various other amazing things that happened in the story. But when he eventually ended up in a hospital and he told the story of what had happened, nobody believed him. They wanted to hear a more rational story. They wanted to hear a simpler story. That's the news reporters. One that can be believed and can be explained. A story without things they've never seen before. A story without miracles. So he told them a different story, since they didn't want to believe the miraculous one. The ship sank. I, my mother, the cook, and the sailor of the ship made it to the lifeboat. The cook found a rat, killed it, and ate it. Then the cook killed the sailor to use his flesh as bait to catch fish to eat. Then he killed my mother, and then I killed him. The dialogue at the end of the movie then flows as follows. I have told you two stories. Neither story tells us what sank the ship. And nobody can prove which story is true and which are not. In both stories, the ship sinks. My family dies and I suffer. So which story do you prefer? I prefer the one with the tiger. And so it goes with God. Now, so what? You can live your life believing that there is a purpose for everything that happens to you, that everything that happens to you has been planned by God and the miraculous God of heaven and earth is involved. Or you can live your life believing that there is no purpose to your existence and there is nobody behind what happens to you. And this, I believe, is what Solomon is getting at. Life is meaningless without faith in God, because everything that happens to you is just good luck or bad luck. Ladies and gentlemen, we are Christians. We walk by faith, not by luck. We believe there is purpose. We believe God stands behind everything that happens in our lives. Howard Lutnick, Greer Epstein, and Mark Winegard, they were not lucky. They were saved by God for a purpose. A purpose maybe that we cannot clearly figure out, but nevertheless a purpose. If you don't believe in God, then you could say, well, time and chance saved them. But if you believe in God, you know His hand was somehow in it and He saved them for a purpose. Listen to this text, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6 to 8. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and He exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit the throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them He has set the world. What a beautiful text that is, isn't it? In chapter 9 and verse 1, Solomon says, so I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands. Isn't that just a powerful text? Everything people do are in God's hands. God doesn't just let things up to fate or to luck. The New Testament says something similar, Ephesians 1 verse 11. In Him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of Him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of His will. Everything that happens outside of our control happens for a purpose. And then you might ask the question, well, why doesn't He tell me the purpose of what happens to me? Because that's what we all want to know, isn't it? But listen to Ecclesiastes chapter 8 verse 17. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all his efforts to search it out, man cannot discover its meaning. Even if a wise man claims he knows, he cannot really comprehend it. Wow. You see, God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. That's what Solomon says in chapter 3 verse 11. In other words, you cannot fathom what God does, but in time, at the correct time, the beauty of what He does will be revealed. And so we believe that God has a purpose. We believe it's not just luck. But we have a different problem. We often take credit for what God has done. We do that. Well, I'm wealthy because I work hard and I'm well disciplined. I have a degree because I studied the nights through. It's me. Really? Consider 1 Corinthians 4 verse 7, B and C. What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? You cannot work hard without oxygen and food. Who gave you oxygen and food so that you could work hard in the first place? Who gave you the job? Who gave you a brain to study? Who keeps you breathing? Who made you the way that you are? Who gave you eyes to see? We could have been born blind. We could have been born vegetables. We could have been born disabled. We could have been without arms. We could have been without legs. That's all grace and a gift of God. All is in God's hands. He deserves all the glory for our achievements. Consider Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 17 to 18. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. That summarizes it well, doesn't it? This principle is true of all aspects of life and brings us to the conclusion that there's nothing that you have or that you are that God did not give to you. James says in James 1 verse 17, every good and perfect gift comes from the Father of the heavenly lights. Now let me conclude. To the Christian, nothing is luck, right? Romans 8 verse 28. For we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love Him. Everything, whether good or bad, happens to the Christian for a purpose based on the content of his heart. If you want to make sure that God is involved in the things outside of your control, then work on your heart, nothing else. In 1974, this is George Foreman, he's a boxer, right? Wrote in his book called God in My Corner. He wrote the following: in 1974, before I went to Africa to fight Muhammad Ali, a friend gave me a Bible to take along with me on my trip. He said, George, keep this with you for good luck. I believed the Bible was just a shepherd's handbook, and probably because the only verse I knew was, the Lord is my shepherd. But I was always looking for luck, and so I carried that Bible with me. I had lucky pennies and good luck charms, so now I added the lucky Bible to my collection of superstitious items. After I lost the fight, I threw the Bible away. I never opened it. I thought, the Bible didn't help me win, so why do I need it? I thought I'd get power from simply owning it. I didn't realize that I needed to read it and believe it and obey it to find power in it. Since then, I've come to understand that the Bible is my roadmap, not my good luck charm. That's George Foreman writing God in My Corner. So let me just repeat this point. To the Christian, nothing is luck. Nothing. Secondly, to the Christian, God gets all the credit. We don't even entertain the idea, I did it or God did it. We don't even entertain that. On an interesting side note, when we get blessed, it's interesting that we then want to take the credit, but yet when things go wrong, we blame God. Very interesting. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 14 tells us so nicely that God is the one that gets all the credit, that good and bad comes from the Father up in heaven. I pray that some of these thoughts have been a blessing to you and that it adds value to your life as you think through it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are where we are and we are who we are because of the grace, power, and magnificence of God, and not because of something we are. He made us who we are. May God bless you. Love you guys lots. Have a fantastic week. Bye-bye.